Loretta Hayes from Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware, and welcome back to our creative videos. So today we're going to show you the construction of a block of a quilt pattern that is called Star Impressions. Star Impressions is a free download from Benartex using their new line of fabrics, and I got to get this right, guys, that are called palette impressions. And there are actually 3 different types of fabrics in the palette impressions line. One of them is called a prism, and it's available in a variety of colors, but you can see it kind of looks like a prism going on like that. The second grouping, also available in a lot of different colors, is called the Impressionisms. And so that it really does look like a kind of impressionistic painting on there. And then the third type is called brushstrokes. And so once again, it looks like brushstrokes on there. Somebody named them really cool. So the combination of these 3 different types of fabrics is what created this really, really cool pattern. We have the fabrics bundled up in half-yard bundles. So if you decide that you want to do this quilt and you want to just kind of a quick thing, you can come in, grab a bundle. Everything you need for this quilt is in the bundle, with the exception of the black fabric that you have in between. And you need like I believe the pattern said 1 1/8 yards of a black fabric. Although, you know, it wouldn't be, you could do, you know, a color. You could do purple or something like that as well. So lots of fun. I like the black just because it does give it that really stained glass look on it. All right, so let's talk about the pattern. There are 2 blocks to the pattern, block 1 and block 2. They are exactly the same pattern, so you can see that there's kind of a star type shape that goes around here, and the same thing going in here. So the pattern themselves are exactly the same. It is simply the different colors in placement, and they do a lovely job giving you, you know, the colors, and then they tell you what letter they are, and then down in here it'll tell you what combinations that you need to do. So this quilt is entirely made out of half square triangles. So when we start out, we're going to be cutting 4-inch squares. And so let's head over to the machine here. And so we're going to be doing 4-inch squares. So I've got a couple of them prepped here. So this one is the purple brush strokes, and we're going to do the impressionistic multicolor. And so I'm going to take and I'm going to place right sides together, and I have drawn a line from one corner of the block to the other corner of the block. Now, we're not going to be stitching down that line. We're going to be stitching 1/4 inch on either side. So for every 2 squares that you put together, you're going to end up with 2 half square units. And they tell you how many of each one, and they are actually counting the actual half square units when they do that. So when I do half square triangles, I like to use my 37 foot or a 1/4 inch foot that doesn't have a guide. We're going to swap over and we're going to do a 57 foot a little bit later that has the metal guide on the side. But I find that oftentimes when I'm stitching down on my half square unit, my guide kind of drags on the fabric and tends to do a little distortion for it. So we're going to put the 57 off to the side for the moment. On the 37, it is 1/4 inch on both sides. So we're simply going to go ahead and we're going to line up the left hand edge of my foot along the right hand edge of the line. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to sew them down. Now, because this quilt is entirely done with half square triangles, you might as well chain them, because you're going to be doing a bunch of them. It's certainly not hard sewing at all, but there's a lot of it. So you're going to come in and we're going to go off of one and we're going to go on to the next one. So you could do as many as you would like. You could prep a whole bunch of units so that you had all of them ready to go. And I usually will go ahead and go down one side, and then I'll come and just flip them around and sew them the second side. And I don't cut them apart until I am ready to, do the final cut. If you have it kind of tailed together, they line up perfectly. It's actually faster the second side because you're already set up and ready to go. You don't have to pick up blocks and maneuver them. So this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have a square where you have your drawn line. We'll trim these apart here. So you'll have your drawn line and you'll have 1/4 inch seams on either side. Once you have these done, then we want to come in and we want to cut up the line. And you could do this with a rotary cutter, that's fine. It isn't one of those situations where it has to be perfect. So oftentimes I just grab a pair of scissors and I just cut up the lines. That way I'm not having to pick up my ruler and whatnot. Once again, speed, because we're doing a lot of them. All right, so now we are off to the ironing board. And so for myself, I'm going to press towards the brush strokes on this one. So I always have the pretty side of the fabric facing me. And I'm going to take and I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance, the brush stroke is back here. So I want my seam allowance going that way. And just from the front side of the square, I'm going to go ahead and press. What you'll find is that the edge of your iron will kind of grab a hold of that lip and really make it nice and flat. You won't end up with accordion pleats, that kind of thing. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to press those. And we should be good. All right, so we're heading back over here. So each one of these star blocks is going to end up having 2 half square, like 4-patch units that are the same. So I've already prepped the other color way, so you'll have those there. So what we want to do is we want to line up and we want to get our next one going. And they give you a picture of it, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, nothing, no big deal here. So we're going to have this in the corner here, and we're going to have this one there. So essentially it would be, we're going like that, if you see the star. So we're going to come in. I'm going to lay it out exactly the way the pattern has it so that when you're looking at this video, you will be able to identify this with the picture. All right, so we've got those 2 there. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to put our brush strokes in there and in here. And you'll see what happens is it creates almost 2 triangles. You've got the 2 very obvious triangles that are going to create the star, but the brush strokes are all on the lower left-hand side of the triangle, and the Impressionism fabric is all on the upper right-hand side of the triangle. So if you ever have a situation where you seem to have like brush strokes on the opposite side, stop. We don't want to have to seam ripper for that. So we're going to have them like this. And I stack both of them up, even though I'm going to have 2 of them here, because I can sew them chain piece that way. So let's take these guys And we're going to start by joining these two together. So this is where I will change my presser foot, and I will put my 1/4" foot with a guide on, which on this machine is my 57D. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to type in our foot because it's going to complain if I don't. So there's my 57D, and I am ready to go. So we're going to simply take and put this one on top of that. You're just really lining up the ends. And we're going to sew that seam down, and if you do it once, you get to do it twice on this one. Go in. If your little dog ears get kind of tangled up with your guide, you can always clip those off. But I usually find if I just give it a little push, it'll just get past those little dog ears. All right, so we have our first one done. So we will lay those back out. And now we're going to come to the second part of the 4-patch, and we're going to sew that together. One of the things I love about these fabrics is they have just a little bit of color difference throughout the fabric. So you can see how this one is a little bit brighter than this one just because of where I cut the fabric out. So it really does give you that look of like light dappling through the glass of the window. All right, there's our second grouping done. So we'll snip those over and lay those back out. Whenever I get cocky and I don't lay them back out, that's where I usually find I put things together opposite. All right, so we're checking them out. We've got the two orange triangles going across from each other to create the tips of the stars. We've got the brush strokes on the lower left. We've got the impressionistic fabric on the upper right. So now we're going to head over to the ironing board, and our goal here is to press this seam allowance going to the right and this seam allowance going to the left so that we can nestle that center point. So let's go ahead and hop over there. And once again, I press on that top side, just using the lip of the iron to push that seam allowance over. So now we're going to go the opposite for this one. And so when we lay them back out, this one is going to the left and this one is going to the right. All right, let's go back to the sewing machine. Now, when we go to the sewing machine, we're going to be doing this. So this is how it was laid out. We're going to be sewing these together. So I would like for my points to be really pretty. So when we come in, somehow I flipped one the wrong way. No, that's there. It's not flipped all the way over. There we go. So I'm going to grab a hold of those, kind of roll them in your fingers so that you've nestled them together, and then you're going to take and grab a hold of them and open it up and check out your point and see if you like the way it looks. If you do, we're going to tuck it underneath the machine and we're going to do a little quilt tack. So quilt tack being 3 or 4 stitches across the point, normal stitch length, normal spacing. So we're going to be right at the 1/4 inch. And so I can open that up and I can check that out. And I really like that one. That works really well. It's looking really good this way. It's looking good on the diagonal. So we'll set that one off to the side there. And we're going to come in and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we'll nestle them up. We'll open it up and check it out. think I probably need to shift this one just a little bit over. But you can see how pinching it makes it so that we can do kind of a little preview. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to line up. Do our little quilt tack. Open it up and check it out. And very nice. So we're looking good again. If we weren't happy with the quilt tacks, remember you can just grab a hold of that bottom thread, pull it out. As I've got two perfect quilt tacks, we're not going to do that. I did that on one of the other videos and then I had trouble getting it back in. All right, so now we've got this anchored. We're now going to take a look at our block and we're going to see if everything is lining up. Remember, you're working with triangles here. So when you're working with triangles, there's some bias stretch, and oftentimes when you press it, it will grow a triangle. And oftentimes I find light fabrics will grow a little bit more than dark fabrics, whether it's the amount of dye they use or whatnot. So if I look at this end, from the quilt tack to the end, they're lining up beautifully. If I look over here on this side, I've got about 1/8 of an inch longer on this side of my project. So what we're going to do, Pam's going, just cut it off. No. We're not going to just cut it off. We're going to line up the end, and we're going to use that quilting rule of you're going to put the bigger side on the bottom. So we're going to come in, we're going to tuck that underneath, and we're going to take off, and we're going to go. Now remember, we quilt tacked our center position, so it's not going to shift because it's stitched. So in that short amount of space between the beginning of the block and where we did the quilt tack, that little 1/8 of an inch is going to get pulled in and we won't have to do any scissor cutting.
Aww.
She's being smart. All right, there's one. So let's take a look at the other one. This one's lining up pretty good. This one has the same thing. So probably that orange fabric stretched a little bit more. So I've got just a tiny little bit more on that side. So we'll line up the end as it's supposed to be. We'll put the bigger piece on the bottom. Remember, you're not taking your quilt tack out. You're just sewing right through it. And we're done. And we're looking good. So we're going to end up going back over to the ironing board to press it. Now, I do need to do one thing when I'm looking for the pressing, because pressing will sometimes make your life easier or make it harder. So when we lay these out, so you can see where I always want to put that one up on the top, but it's not the way it is. There we go, in the picture. We're looking at it like that, and we're looking at it like that. All right, so this intersection where I'm going to be pressing, I have pressed this one, which is going to be its mate. I have pressed it up. So I'm going to make sure that I press that down, and I'm going to make sure I press that down on this side as well, just to make them so that they interlock and nestle. Sometimes it's worth taking just a little look before we go press a whole bunch of them. So we're going to come in, and we're going to give it a press. And look at how pretty those points are. They're looking fabulous. Let me put them over here for a second. Things to be looking at when you're doing half squares. So like this is fabulous. I'm super happy with that. But the other thing we want to be checking out is we want to be checking out the points on the edge of the block. Do you see how this 1/4 inch, this orange point is about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the fabric? And you'll see that we're pretty much that on all the way around. When that's happening, you know that you're doing a really good job on your 1/4 inch seaming, because that's what we want. Because remember, we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam across the top of this. So if my point goes closer to the edge, raw edge of the fabric than 1/4 of an inch, then what I end up doing is I end up like chopping off the tips of the star. on there. And that's one of those things that's kind of a fussy thing. You know, I think we've established I am a little OCD about my points. It's one of those things that if you're aware of it, if you find a point, like let's say we have 3 of them that are 1/4 of an inch and then I have one that goes all the way to the raw edge, I could just seam ripper that little bit, get that corrected before I move on to the next step. So just little things to kind of check out as you're working with it. All right, now let's look at the picture again so that we can line it up exactly as the picture is. So we're looking like that. So we can see kind of the outline of the star using the blue and the orange coming around there. When I look at the purple, okay, brush strokes, they're both on the same side. And when I look at the green brush strokes of the units that I made previous, they are also going the same side. So once again, we now have a 4 patch. So we need to sew these 2 seams and then the opposite. So let's go ahead and line those up. We're going to do a little quilt tack. So once again, I'm going to do my little pinch thing. I'm going to check it out, see if I'm happy with it. Do a little adjusting if you feel like you need it. And then we're going to hop on there and do a little quilt tack. All right, looking pretty good there. And then the next one, just lay it back out, make sure everybody's happy. And we'll come in and do it. Looking really nice coming across there. All right, so let's go ahead, check out our edges. This guy here is lining up almost perfect. This one here, I've got about 1/8 of an inch overhang, so the big goes on the bottom. So through our quilt tack, I'm now lining up my top fabric with my bottom fabric. Remember, somebody's got to be in charge, so it's going to be us rather than the quilt. All right, let's take a look at this little guy here. They're looking pretty good. And once again, we're a little bit long on the bottom end, so running through our quilt tack, and then we're going to line up. And when I'm sewing these little sections here, what you'll find is oftentimes your seam allowances will nestle down there at the corner, because this one's going this way and the other one's coming the opposite way. So it'll give you a little helping hand as you go. All right, so now we're going to open that up. We're going to lay it out like the picture. So we've got there. All right, so we have one more seam before this block is done. So I'm going to press one going one direction and one going the other. So let's head those over to the ironing board. Okey-doke. And this time I'm going to do 3 quilt tacks. The one that I'm most concerned with is the one that's right in the center, because obviously that's the one that, you know, you tend to see the most off. But I'm also going to try and get these little 2 points where the orange and the blue triangle go together. So boom, we'll line that up. And I have students that don't do quilt tacks that will pin it or clip it. I'm all about let's get the quilt done. So whatever technique works for you, I say go with it. I've just always found that the quilt tacks for me, I find if I'm pinning, oftentimes when I pull the pin out, I get a little bit of a shift. And when it's stitched down, it doesn't shift it, you know, it can't shift. And I also like the convenience of, if it's not right, I can literally just pull those few little stitches out and not have to seam ripper a huge amount. So we're going to come in, we're looking there. I'm liking this, and I'm not liking that. So when we come in, we'll grab a hold of our thread, see if we can yank that out by hand. There we go. So we'll open that up. Snuggle those back in again. Looking so much better. All right, so now we're going to take a quick look at the seam. So this looks good, this looks good. This has the pooch, right? So that's the bigger piece. And the one on the bottom here is maybe a smidge more on there. So we're going to put the big side on the bottom. And off we go down the seam. That center one, there's a lot of fabric going into that center point, so you may have to give it a little bit of a push to get it through the thicknesses. That's not a big deal. All right, and we are back up at the ironing board for our final press. And I find oftentimes with triangle quilts, when I get the block to this point, I'll give it a little shot of best press, just to give it a little bit of crispness. And looking good. If you have this pressed over really nicely. But if you have too much thickness in the center, remember you can always press that center seam open to minimize that thickness going there. And ta-da, we have, if I put it down here, Pam, is that good, or hold it up?
Nope, looks good.
All right, and we have our block done. So this is super easy sewing, nothing difficult to do. There's a lot of it. So what I did is I cut out all of my blocks one night. I drew my lines the next night, sewed my 1/4 inch units, half square units the following night, and just did over a period of a week. Had the quilt completely done. So I hope you enjoyed this. The free pattern is down in the description for you to download. See ya.